Earthlings of the world unite. Welcome to another Still Alive. You still alive, Ronnie?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Certainly hope so.
I just had a coughing fit, so I'm kind of struggling.
Yes.
I had a bit of a bad day. Well, actually, my own fault. I kind of stayed up very late. We did this kind of like 9-hour live stream of Tom Reagan stuff through the night.
Oh, right.
So even though it's on in the background and you turn the sound down, it's still kind of, for some reason, it keeps you awake, or you drift in and out, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not next to the bed or anything. It's just that I don't know, it's in your mind, I suppose. Anyway, and I had a bit of a bad day with the putty cat, so it's not been great.
Oh, dear.
But anyway, enough of that. That's not what we're here for. So welcome along, everyone. As always, if you're tuned in elsewhere than my YouTube, then that's the best place to be for the chat if you want to interact with people. If you comment on Facebook, we will be able to see it, so you won't miss out in that sense. Just that you won't be able to see anybody's reply to you and that kind of stuff. And as ever, we don't charge for putting your comments up on the screen. So this one's going to be an interesting one, I think, Ronnie. I think we'll see.
Trip down memory lane.
I suppose it will be, yeah. But I mean, I've just learned something about the history of the A.L.F. I didn't even know about, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. But first off, welcome everyone to Still Alive. Gonna have to have a go on old Benny Malone's drum kit. I think it gets you going. That
yes.
So Michael is here first. Hi, Michael. You were talking about your sleeping bag, weren't you, Ronnie?
Yeah, I think Michael's been in his sleeping bag outside the studio since last week's show.
And I think Andy got here. So Andy did the night shift as well. So we got an excuse. Yeah. So that's that. Vegan Paul, hello there. Vegan Postmortem, Terry in the house. Hi, Deb. Anybody else? Vegan Pundit. Did I put Vegan Pundit up? I'm losing track already, as you can see. Lorraine is here. Dim. There's Philip from New York, as Wendy has trained me to say. Nella, hello. Nice to see you. Yeah. Jennifer's here. I think that might be everyone so far. We've got 15 or 16.
Somebody wants to have a glimpse of my bum again.
Oh no, they're not talking about your bum already, are they? Oh right, okay, yeah. This is Jennifer. She's obsessed with your bum for some reason.
Obsession. I ought to start selling autographed photographs of that bum, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Really?
Or just take it on tour. You could take it on tour. Right. So we're talking about the A.L.F, but we're talking about it in terms of the press office, really. And so what I want to do is just give us an idea about how, because the press office came about in a kind of weird way. I mean, I've kind of got a note. It had a bit of a stuttering start. It wasn't really kind of a planned thing, was it? So can you? So we don't need the A.L.F history, but how did the press office start for you, Ronnie?
Well, what happened is I'd already been in prison a couple of times for A.L.F activities, and it was like the kind of, by now it was the late 70s, and so I was known. I was kind of known to the media. Whereas at that time, very, very few people had been in prison.
It cracks me up. She's talking about your crack here. Look,
my cracks her.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
She's a very bad person, that one.
Yeah. So we want a photo of your bum on here, Roger. It's not fair that it's been mine.
It'll never happen. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the press office.
That'll be a very big super chat to get that. I'll tell you that for a start. We don't do them, so.
Yeah, what happened was, and at that time, although this was to change quite considerably later, when lots of people started getting arrested and put in jail, you know, but in the late 70s, I was one of the very few people that had been in prison for A.L.F. activities, and I'd been in a couple of times. So when anything happens, when there was an A.L.F. action, and the media wanted some background on it, wanted to speak to somebody about it, they would always contact me or try to contact me, and very often it was kind of through. I didn't have my own phone at home, so it was always through. Quite often it would be through the BUAV, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, or maybe one of the other organisations, and then they'd somehow get in touch with me. And I mean, these were these days were long before we had mobile phones or anything like that. And so I used to speak. I was the kind of de facto press officer without having that.
Yeah, but there was no planning. You didn't even have your own phone.
I didn't have my own phone or anything, and they used to contact me. It's just, it's incredible how anything worked in those days. To be quite honest, it was just that I used to kind of. I suppose I saw other people in the movement quite frequently, so it's probably quite easy to get a message to me to kind of, phone somebody from the media, and that's how it worked. And so eventually I decided, I kind of might as well sort of put myself out there as someone who can speak to the media about the A.L.F, because I started to kind of realize the usefulness of being able to explain why people were taking the actions they did, because, if there was no one there to do that, I mean, sometimes the activists would phone the press up and claim responsibility for their action, and then make a short statement in connection with that. But they kind of didn't really want to stay on the phone too long. So there was never much, it didn't go into very much detail. And so I was there to talk about the reasons why, why the A.L.F did what it did. And I thought it was useful to be able to do that. And so I kind of sort of officially became the press officer. And what happened was
was that your idea, or did the press just start calling you that?
No, no, I think it was. No, I think it's probably my idea to say I was the press officer, so that they would. Because what happened was the BUAV allowed me to use a desk in their offices where I had a phone, so the press were actually able to phone me.
To the big time you were.
Yeah. So I had my own little desk and that, and later on when they moved premises, they even let me have my own little office. There they had quite a lot of spare space in their offices, which they gave over to other groups, and one of those groups was the A.L.F press office. So, and I had my own little office within the bigger office that had some other groups in it, and so that so that was great. And I had my phone in there.
And this is what, 84, 83?
This was probably a little bit earlier than that. I think probably early 80s. Probably because I think there was a dispute with the BUAV, and they threw us out, and I think they threw us out around about. I think it was probably around about 83, something like that.
Well, they'd moved to Crane Grove by then. That was
we were at Crane Grove, which was their new place. They were in.
But that's where you had the office. So you must have been there in 84, surely, no?
I'm not really sure. It might have been 84 when we got thrown out there, because after we got thrown out the BUAV, we had two further premises. We were at we had an office in Putney for a while, and then we had one in Hammersmith.
Yeah, I knew the Hammersmith one, but not the Putney one.
I ended up getting arrested and put in prison on remand in 86. So I think it's probably about 83 that we got thrown out the BUAV.
Okay,
Um,
right here.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there are.
Here's a technical question from Deb. Did you contact the press or certain journalists, or did they contact you? It'd been a bit of both.
No, they contacted me. They contacted me. They had that the number that I could be contacted. It kind of sort of went round the media, and they used to either contact me or they'd say phone the BUAV and say, do you know how we can contact Ronnie Lee? Or they'd phone one of the other organisations. I think sometimes the Hunt Sabs, and ask to speak to me, and then those groups would contact me, and sometimes then I'd phone the journalist back. But in the end, we had a dedicated phone number, especially when we kind of when I was at we had the office at the BUAV's offices at Crane Grove, and then we had when we rented after we left the BUAV, we rented an office in Putney, and in order to get we masqueraded as a tax advisory service, because the guy that kind of helped us get the office, a guy, is the guy that at the time was running the supporters group, A.L.F supporters group. He'd been a tax officer, so when he sorted out the office, he said, it's a tax advisory service. So we rented the office under the name of the Independent Tax Advisory Service, and none of us knew anything at all about tax. And some of the people in the office,
not even paying it.
What happened? Yeah, we weren't paying it. No, and what happened is these guys from this, people from the other offices used to come in and say, could you help me with a tax problem? Because we knew nothing about it. So we said, we're just the admin staff, and you'll have to wait till the boss comes in. He'll help you. And sometimes this guy that helped set up the office, he would come in, and then we'd get him to go and talk to the people that had the query, because he actually did know about tax. But one thing I remember, it was indicative. One thing that really sticks in my mind is indicative of the kind of racism that was around at the time. I mean, of course, racism was still around, but perhaps more prevalent than, in that when I went to rent, because we had to leave the office in Putney for some reason. It wasn't because they found out about us or anything like that. There was some reason why. I think the place was being sold or something. And when I went in to rent the place in Hammersmith.
Yeah, it's near the Odeon, wasn't it? The famous Odeon.
It was near the Odeon. Well, yeah. I also kind of rented a place to live nearby, and when I went in to rent that, the guy in the rental place, he phoned up the landlord, and he kind of looked at me and said, no, he's not, he's white. And so obviously the landlord had asked him if I was a person of colour, and if I had been, I wouldn't have got the flat. So
all right, so you got your flat on the back of the office. So yeah, okay.
No. Well, it was kind of because I needed to live fairly near the office.
Yeah, close. Yeah,
so I got the two at the same time.
Yeah.
It was on. There's a big kind of roundabout in Hammersmith, and in the middle of the roundabout you got the underground station, and it was on the outside of the roundabout. Like, I think the build. I've looked on Google Maps, and I think the building is still there where we had the office. Although all of that's been very much kind of changed around there, and a lot of new renewed and everything. I think our office is the building where our office was right at the top is still actually there, from what I could see. Once again, that we were the Independent Tax Advisory Service.
Yeah, I remember there's a plaque on the wall, isn't there?
I'm not sure there was. This is a common sort of story.
Well, it might have just been a postcard. Then there was something, because I remember seeing it.
Oh, we might put something on the door saying that.
Yeah, okay.
So that just to kind of help with the cover. And
Yeah,
people
well,
even used to the guys from the other office where we worked before in the adjoining office used to come there to ask for advice
oh
about
no,
and,
all
and,
right.
and, and they also had some sort of scam where they got all these free stamps, and they used to come and sell us these stamps for half price, because obviously, we had quite a lot of mailing to do, because I shared an office with the A.L.F supporters group, and of course Viv, who ran the A.L.F supporters group, she was mailing out their newsletters, so stamps were very useful.
Yeah.
So we used to get sold these stamps at half price from the guys that had the office next to us when we were at Putney.
Okay, we'll come back to Nella's question, but Paul is saying, is it still, because the
Yes.
SP means supporters group, and so this
Supporters
was
group,
a time when things got a little bit more organised, didn't it?
Kind of what happened was, when the supporters group kind of first started, which was, I'm not sure it was late 70s or kind of early 80s. It was the newsletter was just run off on a kind of Ronio machine, and it was just text. It was just text, the early supporters group newsletters, and then it started including some photographs, but they weren't that great quality. And then it kind of moved to being photocopied in the office, when we were at Hammersmith, and I think before that at Putney as well. We had this great, we rented this huge photocopying machine, and Viv used to run the supporters group newsletter off on this photocopying machine. She used to put it together using a typewriter and Letraset. And Letraset was letters you kind of stuck on the paper, and so you kind of created a kind of like a hard copy, and then you photocopied it. That's how it was there was none of this digital stuff like today. It was much more complicated. And any photograph you got, you had to, Viv used to take it to some place where the photograph got specially processed, so it got turned into an image with dots on it, so that it would actually, come out better when it was photocopied. So there was quite a lot of work. There was loads of work went into it, into laying it all out, putting it together. And then it was photocopied on this huge photocopying machine we had, and then all stapled together. And that's how it was. And when it was photocopied, we were able to, put a lot of pictures in it, or Viv put a lot of photographs in it, and they came out reasonably well because it was photocopied.
This is way before the Archangel, wasn't it?
This is before Archangel. I mean, Archangel was, I think, late 1980s. That was when I was in prison. Archangel came out. But what happened with the supporters group newsletter? The supporters group newsletter, it was for people that couldn't be active but wanted to still support the A.L.F. So one of the main functions of it was to to provide funds to help prisoners, because although prisoners do get a small wage in prison, it's not very much money, and there are certain things that can be bought for prisoners that can be sent in from outside, such as books, and I think at the time sort of music cassettes and things like that, and also newspapers. Yeah, I used to remember one time I used to get the Guardian every day, kind of ordered, and there's this other thing, you get your wages in prison. I mean, this is the UK. It's probably different in other countries, and that was back then, and I'm not quite sure even the situation in the UK now. You had your wages, which you could spend on food in the prison shop, which they call the canteen, but most prisoners used to spend it on tobacco. And then you had something called private cash, which was much more limited in what you could spend it on. You could use that to order books from outside. You could use that to order music cassettes and things like that. That was much more limited in what you could use the private cash for. And the private cash could be sent in to you from outside.
You could get a Walkman sent in, but this was
you get a Walkman, you get radio sent in and stuff like that. Yeah.
I still got my prison radio somewhere.
Wow, that's incredible. I think
Yeah.
I gave mine to another prisoner when I
I think it's got my number on it still, I think.
Oh wow, yeah.
Mm.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So you know, there was like you know, one of the main functions of the sports group was to raise funds for the prisoners, but in the early days, that they also raised funds for you know, for equipment to be used in
Oh, yeah.
action.
Sponsor a crowbar and
Yeah,
that
they
kind
had
of
these things like sponsor a crowbar, sponsor
thing.
bolt cutters, you know, pay for the fuel used on a raid.
That can't have been legal, surely, Ronnie.
It wasn't. It wasn't. No, that was totally illegal. It was
Oh,
totally
right,
illegal. That was like kind of conspiracy to cause criminal damage. It was in. It was. Yeah, I mean, that was it. But I think what happened was the supporters group kind of got away with that for a long time, and because they kind of got away with it, it just kind of carried on doing it. And there was even a thing that if somebody sponsored a pair of bolt cutters, they would get a framed photo taken on the raid that they could put on their wall. You know, and it was, and there were all these badges. They were like,
group,
there was a badges. There was a standard badge for an ordinary supporters group member because it was £2 a month, I think. Standing order, £2 a month. So £24 a year was your sort of basic fee to be a supporters group member. And you'd have the ordinary supporters group members badge, and people would get one of these every year, and there'd be a little thing on it that had the year on it, you see. And then also, if someone gave a certain amount of extra money, they became like a special supporter. And then I think if someone gave a bit more money than that, they were an extra special supporter. And there was all these different badges. And so you'd get these people, they're often elderly people, you'd see them on demos, and they'd be like some decorated general. They'd have all these loads of badges, loads of sports group badges.
Oh, the different years on it,
yeah. yeah, proudly wearing all my, you know,
if you get a lot of money, you get a sweaty balaclava
supporter, and I've got that. Yeah, and it was So it was really
okay. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to the press office.
Yeah.
And Nell is asking, did journalists back then reported the facts correctly since there was a press office, or gave their own welfare explanation? What do you say to that, Ronnie?
Well, they would quote what I said, but they often wouldn't quote all of it. They'd often only, you know, quote a small part of it.
I remember only being quoted accurately very rarely myself.
Well, sometimes they they'd make mistakes in the quote, but it would be an attempt to kind of quote what I said, even though they got it wrong, rather than just writing something themselves. Where the welfarist stuff used to come from would be from the people on the other side. Like if you raided a place, then you'd get the people there saying, "Oh, the welfare here for the animals is excellent," and they'd be going on like that. And that's where you tended to get the welfarist stuff.
Yeah, my experience of this is that because I had a smaller operation in the north, of course, and that meant that I got some relationships with certain journalists, and back then, before the internet age, I think journalists stayed with publications longer than they probably do now, and so they were still there year on year, and so you ended up in their phone book, and they ended up in yours, because really. One of the technicalities that came up in the trial was kind of, well, if you weren't involved, how did you know about what was going on? And we explained that by saying, well, really, we were like a specialist press association or something, in the sense that the activists who didn't want to talk to the press themselves for all the reasons that you gave, they would contact us, give you the kind of details of what they've done, then you'd go to the media. But they were saying, well, that means you're involved. And said, well, no, we don't know whether they've done that. All we know is that they've said that they've done it, and so then it was up to the press to actually confirm whether they'd done it or not, right? And so that's the way it worked with me, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, very very often, I used to get calls from the media about things that I didn't know the slightest thing about. Somebody had done an A.L.F action and claimed responsibility, or they'd done an action and painted A.L.F on the wall next to it or something like that, and I'd get a call from the media, and of course I didn't know about what had happened. You know, the activists. I tended, you know, I always
sounds like one of ours, but I'm not sure.
well, I used to always encourage activists to claim responsibility themselves rather than to like contact me for me to phone the media. So mostly it was that people would claim responsibility, or there'd be an action that looked like an A.L.F action, and then the media would contact me and say, you know, we want to talk to you about this. What have you got to say about it, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you see, in today's age of professionalism and all that kind of stuff, this will sound very amateur. It's just that the actual entire premise of the A.L.F was that you joined the A.L.F by doing something.
Yes.
It wasn't a sense of, oh, you contact Ronnie Lee, you get a membership card, and he comes and tells you what to do.
It was completely decentralized. I mean, how the A.L.F spread was just it was just like started off with like a small group of people doing something, and then other people in other places thought, that's great, I'm going to do the same thing. And there was nobody giving anyone instructions or giving anyone orders or anything like that. It was just people copied what other people did. And I think as long as they stuck to certain principles, they could claim it as an A.L.F action. In other words, you know, I mean, obviously it needed to be direct action. You know, you couldn't just do a demo and call it the A.L.F. It had to be direct action, and it had to be. There was a policy that the activists should do their utmost not to endanger either human or human or other animal lives, wasn't there? I'm not quite sure how it was worded, but that was the.
Yeah, I remember 3. So there was rescue animals from places of animal use, cause economic sabotage, and no action should endanger human or other animal lives.
That's right. Yeah, those were the 3. And if people kind of sort of stuck to that, they could say that their action was the A.L.F. So the A.L.F was really a name for a form of action, in a sense.
It was also a name for an idea, really, wasn't it?
An idea, yeah. It wasn't. So
it's not an organisation; it's an idea. Yeah.
There was no like central committee, or you know, there's no, there's no big bosses. At a local level, when you come down to the local groups, you know, A.L.F, local A.L.F groups, there would be like, there would be people that were like the kind of the instigators, I suppose. Prime movers would be, I suppose it would be called as well. And they tended to be kind of called planners, because you'd get people that would kind of plan an action, and then there'd be other people that didn't want to be involved in the planning. They just said, just let me know when you want me, and I'll come along and take part in the action. You know, there were people in that category, and so you did have a kind of what you might call a bit of a leadership at local level, but that didn't exist at
it's more like coordination level than leadership, wasn't
it? Was really more. It wasn't a leader. They weren't like some kind of Führer or anything like that. It was
because I didn't really get involved. Well, the official story is I didn't really get involved with the nitty-gritty of the actual action thing. I was just like the press officer, because at the time I also used to do the press for the Hunt Saboteurs during the Waterloo Cup and this kind of thing. Debbie's got an interesting question for you, Ronnie. Because the A.L.F was individual or non-centralized, did the press ask you if you condoned the different actions as they contact you about?
They normally, when that, normally they did that when they contacted me about actions that were outside the remit of the A.L.F, because they would say, oh, you know, sometimes they say, well, how would you justify this? How would you justify?
Oh, surely you can't justify that one.
Yeah. But where there's this thing about condoning or do you condemn this type of question would be because there were other groups set up that wanted to operate outside the principles of the A.L.F. There was the Animal Rights Militia, there was the Justice Department, various names, Hunt Retribution Squad, where they said that they wanted to actually use violence against the people that oppressed animals. There was very little of that violence done, to be quite honest. But there was a big splash about it in the media, and the odd thing would kind of happen, like there'd be there was a time when some devices, some kind of litter bombs, I think they were more incendiary devices than bombs, were sent through the post to. There was one time when they got sent to a load of politicians, wasn't there? Or they'd be sent to animal researchers and people like that.
And including what that guy Steele, was it Steele, the Liberal guy? Because
David Steele. Steele.
Yeah, it was the one before him, I think. But
Jeremy
thing there was people were going, well, he was a kind of like an animal person in a kind of animal welfare kind of thing.
They sent them to all the leaders of the different parties and everything.
Yeah, I think so.
It was claimed under Animal Rights Militia or something, and they. That kind of media would say, well, surely you must condemn this. And I'd say, well, look, this is outside, this is not what the A.L.F. would do because our policy is so-and-so. But, the people we should really be looking to condemn are the people responsible for what happens to the animals. So I'd always turn it that way. I never really wanted to condemn the people that did these things. I didn't want to use that language. So I'd kind of twist it and say, well, look, hang on a minute. Let's compare. I understand that people might not be happy about what these people did, but let's compare it against what happens to the animals. And let's talk about condemning that, shall we? And I'd always turn it like that when I spoke to the media.
Yeah, and of course there was always that question which I've asked you before about whether the best policy with the militia and that would be just say, well, that's a different organisation, go speak to them. But it's obviously difficult then because you've got asking you questions and you think, well, let's make the most of it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I tried to do. There was no one to speak to with these groups. They didn't have a press officer. There was no point of contact with them.
No, but it would have separated the groups out a bit better than it ended up being. Nikki here, it's the press that control the narrative. Well, unfortunately, it's the same all the time. In fact, I think I put a meme up from Ralph Miliband, who's the father of the Miliband, politicians, and he was in the 70s. He was like a sociologist, and he was saying that conservatives can't kind of brainwash people, but what they can do is by their control of the media, they can really shape the way that people look at things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they condemn things. They could almost just make those things seem like, silly or childish or, they've got a lot of control in that sense. And our job in some ways was to try and manage them wanting to impose their own narrative.
Yeah, it was difficult because at the end of the day, you can't control what they print in the newspapers. And it was very interesting how things developed in terms of the media, because right in the early days, because of course the A.L.F. was known as the Band of Mercy for the first 3 years, between 73 and 76. And two of us got put in prison for Band of Mercy activities, including trying to burn down an animal research lab that was being built, and we each got a 3-year prison sentence, and the headlines in the Sun, which at the time was the most widely read newspaper in the country, and I think still is. The headline was. The article was all in our favour. It was said, I think the headlines were something like "non-meat martyrs" or something like that, and it said that almost that we were heroes trying to destroy this torture centre, and how terrible it was that we'd been sent to prison.
Well, I mean that ties in with the subject really, because we want to kind of move on to the controversy things, but
yeah,
I mean, it soon changes. I mean, this is David Henshaw,
yeah.
And you're mentioned about 60 times in this, Ronnie.
Yes. Yeah.
Including this lovely picture of you there.
Oh yeah, I look particularly nasty in that picture.
Yeah, but this is where you talk about your kind of evil little eyes and all this kind of stuff.
Oh yes, yeah.
And then in relation to me, I had this terrorist in the classroom.
Oh yeah.
Front page of the Irish Mirror, and so the press changed. There's no doubt about it. When it was largely about rescue, and especially beagles, the press loved it, and the media loved it as well, right?
When it was animal rescue, but don't forget that first that first article in the Sun newspaper I spoke about just now, that was for damage. That was for trying to burn a place down, and we'd also destroyed or badly damaged a couple of seal hunting boats.
It was kind of new then, though, you see, wasn't it? It was new, and
I think it was new, and they thought it was probably a one-off, and it wasn't really a threat to anyone. And the newspapers are thinking, well, hang on a minute, what headline is going to? I think it was jail for wrecking. It was jail for wrecking animal torture center or something like that. Was another of the headline or the sub headline or something in that. So it was like, they were kind of right on our side. And I think it was because they thought, that we'll probably sell more newspapers by being sympathetic to these guys, because this is probably a lot of one-off action. But I think when the A.L.F grew and started to spread, it was seen as kind of more of a threat to big business. And of course, the media, they're part of big business. There's links between all these people, and so they very much began to change their attitude.
Well, this is when Rupert Murdoch was being a big player, and you had Maxwell with the Mirror. Then you got Rupert Murdoch who bought out the Sun. The Sun used to be fairly left wing, and then it became very right wing. Brought in things like Page 3, and then they started interfering with the British elections and stuff.
Yes, I mean they backed various parties. I mean, the Sun switched allegiance from the Tory party to the Labour Party, but only because the Labour Party under Tony Blair, Tory Blair, only because it was really a kind of, it was very much a right wing party, not as right wing as the Tories, but it was right wing, and so the Sun thought, the Labour Party are right wing enough for us to be able to support them.
Well, do you remember the Kinnock one? When the Kinnock election was, it said if Labour win, the last one to leave the country turn off the lights. Right.
There's all sorts of they try to. But the problem is that what they do, these newspapers do is they kind of brainwash people into voting against their best interests, because the people that read these tabloids are mostly poorer people. So there's no benefit to those people of having a conservative government, and yet
except they did encourage people to buy their own council houses, which tied them down to a mortgage. It was
exactly, all those things. So that they're actually encouraging people to vote against their own interests, because that's in the interests of the media moguls. It's much more in the interests of the media moguls to have a government that supports right wing economics, isn't it? So they're allowed to make more money.
Okay, so we've got a couple of things running now. So a few weeks ago, when we kind of touched on this issue, I asked you about whether, because the Band of Mercy and then the A.L.F kind of came out of the Hunt Saboteurs, whether if it wasn't for the Sabs, it might have been that the A.L.F and the Band of Mercy might not have started in the first place. But because it started that way, this is, in a sense, we've got to make, get people to understand that there was no vegan education in those days, and so it was all to do with like identifying an enemy and then kind of attacking them in one way or another, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, in terms of where we are now, in terms of vegan education, in some ways, we played a part in delaying vegan education in the country, didn't we? Really?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, because it was all it was all it was attack on supply rather than trying to deal with demand, and of course demand drives supply, and we kind of, but that was kind of what we did was we sort of carried on really with the same idea that existing organizations already had, because of course, I mean, direct action really started in the 60s with hunt saboteurs. But kind of prior to that, all you had was these kind of national organizations that were very, I suppose, conservative, kind of with a kind of small c, and they and kind of they were campaigning organisations who campaigned on single issues. You had the National Anti-Vivisection Society, British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, League Against Cruel Sports. You had the Captive Animal Protection Society, who campaigned against zoos and circuses, and you know these various groups that were campaigning groups on single issues, whereas the Vegan Society wasn't really so much a campaigning group in that way, and so what we did was we just kind of carried on the same, only it became more militant and kind of more grassroots, but we carried on with the same ethos of single issue campaigning. And that's kind of what happened. We just carried it was kind of more of the same, but in a kind of more
you see, from my point of view, and I think we might have a different take on this, but because as you said, when it all started with the Band of Mercy and even the A.L.F. and everything, damage was something that had happened all the time. Whereas when I became aware of the A.L.F., there was a lot of rescue.
Yes.
Which was getting a lot of really good publicity. I mean,
Yes.
obviously the rest of the movement loved it, seeing people come out with a beagle, you know, this kind of stuff. But also the media loved that as well.
Yes.
And then we had this kind of technicality of the homes kind of drying up a little bit for all kind of reasons, which we talked about before on the grounds that if a group goes into a unit and there's 20,000 individuals, and you've got homes for just a few, 50, it's difficult to stick to 50. And so that might mean that if you're going to end up at a sanctuary, then you end up with double the amount, or in one case that I know about, all the beings who were rescued, liberated, were pregnant. And
yes.
So that ended up with the people who had already agreed to take them to end up with a much larger problem than they thought they were taking on, as it were.
Absolutely.
And so therefore then there was a big push then towards the damage part of it.
Well, I think it was kind of, in a sense, it was kind of in parallel. The reason why the sort of in the early days we really stuck to damage, because the Band of Mercy only ever rescued animals on one occasion, which was when we rescued 6 guinea pigs. But we hadn't intended to rescue the 6 guinea pigs. We'd intended to damage the vehicle at the premises. That was a laboratory animal suppliers. But when we got there in the early hours of the morning, the vehicle wasn't there. The person who drove it had probably taken it home. So we just went into a building and there was some baby guinea pigs and we just took 6. It wasn't, we hadn't planned to do that. It was just that the vehicle we were going to damage wasn't there. So it was a kind of accidental rescue. It actually resulted in the place closing down because they were so terrified that these activists knew their location and everything that they closed the business down. Just on the back of the rescue of 6 guinea pigs.
More innocent days in those days, Ronnie.
Yeah, well, yes, but the reason why we didn't really go for rescue was because of lack of numbers. Because you generally need more people to do an animal rescue than you need to carry out a damage action. You can do damage with a couple of people. I mean, a lot of the damage was just done by one person throwing a brick through a window.
Well, you kind of need an infrastructure, don't you? Because you do the raid. You might need a lot of people. You might need a van rather than a car. You then might need to go to somewhere like a holding unit for everything to calm down, and then you need to have a system of distributing the liberated individuals to their forever home and this kind of stuff. Now that compared with just going in and doing something is a lot of work and a lot of
yeah. I mean, absolutely, and yeah, it's a lot more complicated, and you need the numbers, and with the Band of Mercy, there were only ever 6 of us, right? When the A.L.F. What kind of happened was that there were 2 of us put in prison for Band of Mercy activities. We were sent to prison in 1975, and I probably was a bit pessimistic about what would happen, because I thought, people are going to see that we're in jail and they're not going to want to carry on. And in fact, I think several of the founders of the Band of Mercy actually stopped being involved in action after 2 of us were sent to prison. But when I came out of prison, what happened in the meantime? There'd been a big upsurge in Hunt Saboteurs membership. There'd been a program on the television about the Hunt Saboteurs, and that attracted a lot of members to them. A big upsurge in Hunt Sab's membership, and there'd been quite a bit of publicity about the about our case. There'd been the rescue of some beagles from ICI who had been used in smoking experiments. That happened while we were in prison. And so when I got out of prison, I had all these kind of young Hunt Sabs coming up to me saying, I want to do the same as you did. How do I get involved? And I was amazed. This is incredible. So all these people want to be involved in that sort of action. And that's really why when the name changed to the A.L.F, because a lot of these new people, they didn't like the name, the Band of Mercy. They said, what's that about? It doesn't mention animals. Sounds like a religious organization. So we changed the name to the Animal Liberation Front. And there was suddenly lots more activists. And because there were more, in fact, the very first A.L.F raid, the very first raid under the name of the A.L.F was the rescue of beagles. Some beagles were rescued from a facility in Kent, and that was the first action. The very first A.L.F action was a rescue.
Well, you can't go wrong with one of those. But let's move to the controversial stuff then. And a lot of that is, I mean, none of them really have got anything to do with the rescue, because that was always popular, even with the press. So can you remember, for example, one issue that caused me a lot of trouble? And there's a bit of a story about when I started to become the Northern Press Office. Now, you might remember this differently, but I think I had to contact you because the issue of mink releases came up.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So can you remember the first mink release, and what was your attitude to that?
Well, I was kind of, I was sort of in 2 minds, because, I mean, the thing is that the A.L.F had these kind of principles, but people used to kind of sort of, this principle of like not doing harm to, to other sentient life, I suppose you could call it, both humans and non-human animals. People gave that a broad interpretation, you see. And what happened was there was, people began, releasing mink from mink farms where the mink were being reared for slaughter for fur. And of course, there was a huge hoo-ha about this, because it was claimed that all the minks are going to devastate, animals living, all the animals living locally in the wild, including like water voles, who are like kind of a sort of endangered species, and there was all that going on. There's a big hoo-ha about that.
And otters, of course.
Yes, and competing with otters. The situation was, though, that there was already a considerable population of minks living in the wild, because what had happened is when the fur farmers had bred too many minks to supply the demand, what they did was that a lot of them just released the surplus ones, just into the wild, because that was cheaper and easier than just killing them all and disposing of them all. So the original minks that were released, and the reason we already had a population of minks throughout the country, was because they'd been released by the fur farmers. So what was happening when the A.L.F released minks, that was just adding to a population that was already there. You see, so it wasn't that, oh, we've never had minks never had minks in the wild, and you've released them into the wild and they're going to cause havoc. That wasn't actually true. There were already minks living in the wild, and what the A.L.F. release was doing was adding to
a
that
lot
number.
of releases were to do with the Second World War, that they released the minks because they when they had to go off to do their service.
It was done by the minks. It was done for whatever reason. It was done by the mink, the farmers.
I don't think the fact that there is existing minks really solves the situation.
Well, it was kind of.
The problem is
it dealt with the question of you've released this alien species that isn't. The idea that there aren't any minks in the wild and suddenly you put them into the wild, that wasn't true. But I think, I mean, there was a problem with all this huge number of minks being released, because, of course, that would be a problem in several ways. I mean, first of all, that was yet another predator being released that would prey on other animals, for a start. Secondly, there'd be fighting between them and the existing minks who'd already established territories. And thirdly, because these animals had had grown up all their lives in cages, they wouldn't be really aware of the outside world. So it would be much more likely for them to be killed on the roads. So there was there were really quite a few reasons why this wasn't a good idea. But the problem was it was kind of difficult to say, oh, this isn't an A.L.F. action, this isn't in line with A.L.F. principles, because, of course, you could kind of see, well, the people that have gone in there haven't actually, harmed the farmer, they haven't harmed the mink, they've just let them go. You see, so it was a kind of really, really difficult one to deal with. In terms of the media.
Yeah, I remember being very, very, very tricky. Debbie's saying here about ironic that they cared about the well-being of the enslaved after their release. It's more to do, I think, really was kind of wildlife groups, conservation groups.
They were more concerned about the kind of the
RSPB, for example.
Kind of more
ground nesting birds
and
the problem is, because the mink had been released already, right back to, say, the Second World War, well, what happens then is that the population expands out into their environment and their habitat to the extent that they can. And so by introducing new ones, then you've got a problem, because there's actually too many. Because there was an idea when the fur farms were banned in Ireland, the idea was that some of them are going to be shipped back to the States or to Canada. The problem is that Canada is kind of full, or wherever now they're indigenous, the place is full, because that's how it works. In the fact that a population will expand and expand to the limit of its the carrying capacity of the land, if you like. So the idea of taking them back, and especially with them being semi-tame in a way, because what tends to happen, unfortunately, with the minks is that most of them just hang around the farm. And
a lot did, because that's all they ever knew. You see, they hadn't grown up in the wild.
And then a lot get killed on the road because they're not used to fast-moving vehicles. The vehicles they're used to are those little trolley things that go along, and
absolutely.
And all that.
It wasn't an action I was happy about.
It was very difficult to defend it because of all these kind of problems.
So you kind of had to say, well, I'd have to say, kind of probably similar in how I dealt with, when they were asking what I thought about the people sending the letter bombs or whatever, is to say, well, look, I understand that some people may be unhappy about this, but what you've got to remember is if we didn't have the mink farms in the first place, this wouldn't have happened. And you have to remember also that the original culprits of releasing mink into the wild were the fur farmers. And I said, so the solution to this, if people don't like this, then the
and already solution, by that time there'd been polls, and mink farming wasn't popular either.
No, mink farming wasn't popular.
So there's that kind of democratic kind of bit. Now, do you remember this bit, Ronnie? So I'd moved to the north. That's why I became the northern press officer in the end. but I knew some activists back in the South. And when this issue of will you become the Northern Press Officer, I eventually agreed to do it. But the mink thing was a problem. And I think you said, well, why don't you go and speak to some activists and see what their take on it. I don't know if you remember that, but I went back.
Yes.
I went back down south and spoke to the ones that I knew, the activists,
Yeah.
and their attitude was, and I'd be really interested to see what people in the chat think of this. Their attitude was, well, okay, it's not a perfect situation, and a lot of them are going to get killed on the roads. A lot of them are going to get shot and trapped by the farmers because that's what tends to happen as well. But some will actually be truly liberated. And if you were in a concentration camp and somebody opened the doors, would you go even with that low kind of percentage chance of you actually making it? And they argued that you would go.
Yes.
And so you're kind of giving them the minks that type of.
Yes, and obviously that's true. Although that kind of doesn't.
It doesn't answer the ecological problem. No, I know.
It doesn't deal with the ecological problem.
No.
And it was difficult. It was something that I never took part in myself. I took part in one raid on a mink farm, but our aim was to damage the equipment there. We had I remember we had a cat carrier and we were going to rescue one of the mink and actually not release that mink into the wild. Somebody had I think
that's the only thing you can do. But then you're back to very few individuals. And really, the best thing to do with a mink farm situation would be to get in and let them all out, but not let them out of the compound. And then if you destroyed their cages, that would cause a heck of a lot of
economic.
So it's economic sabotage thing. The problem is it doesn't do any favors at all for the minks. So again, it's one of those things where there are real kind of swings and roundabouts.
It was a real difficult one.
The mink thing has never sat well with a lot of activists because
I can understand why. I mean, it didn't sit well with me, which is why I never took part in any mink release.
Do you know about this one, Ronnie? Did you know about the raid on Paynton Zoo? That's where Chris might be mentioned in the Animals film. Apparently,
was this one where birds were? If Chris can say, was this involving birds?
I don't know. It said it might be mentioned in the Animals film, so I'm trying to think about that bit.
Yeah, I can't. It vaguely rings a bell. I don't know what. I remember some birds being rescued from a zoo down in.
That's Devon, isn't it? Is it Paynton, Devon?
Paynton's in Devon.
Yeah,
because I don't know whether it was Devon or Cornwall. Because I remember I was on holiday down there at the time and the police raided the holiday cottage where I was staying and accused me of taking these birds and searched the place and looked under the bed to see if they could find birds, or birds as they call it, birds.
You see Nella here, going back to the mink, this is the attitude of the activists, was that if I had the chance I'd take it, and so
yes, I totally understand.
I do.
And it's a kind of a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're also it's
okay. Well, look, we're an hour in already, so let's move on because we've got a list. So another one which I know activists that I've spoke to are not particularly happy with, but it's incredibly useful, is arson. So what is your attitude towards arson?
Well, my attitude towards arson has changed. I kind of wouldn't support arson these days because I think it's I think at the time we kind of we were so desperate to kind of attack these places and damage these places that we kind of didn't think enough about it, didn't think deeply enough about it, and this idea of avoiding harm to life, avoiding endangering sentient life. When you use arson, it's that's really impossible to do, because what about small animals that might be still living in whatever you set fire to, or
Can
even
you believe it?
insects.
They've even made the topic of arson about your bum.
Us. Or let the hair grow on it, really. I
Yeah.
suppose that's the thing.
I do remember you saying that activists should say if they want to burn down a broiler unit, they should get on the roof and see if there's any nesting birds.
I kind of did say that, but I don't think, whatever you do, I don't think you can be certain that there aren't any other animals.
It's impossible. There's no such thing as an empty building.
No, there's no such thing. And then if you consider insects, I don't know really whether we really did consider insects then, but I think we kind of have to, and we have to give them the benefit of the doubt regarding sentience. I mean, there's been some recent
about
research
rats as well. Rats
and rats, and mice and birds, and I think we were kind of just so determined to destroy these places that we kind of it's a bit like the mink release, really, where people don't think about surrounding circumstances in terms of what they're doing. They want to think about releasing the mink, but like, what about the animals that are living in the wild and the harm that might do to them?
Yeah, it becomes a bit utilitarian in the end, doesn't it? Unfortunately, this is a real kind of it's a tragedy, really, because you want to do what you can. And especially back in those days, when we got to remember that we were in a scenario where there was no vegan education. It's not as though you could you can go and do We the Free instead. It wasn't like that, right? So
no. And I think we were just so determined to attack these people and just so overcome by the horror of what was happening to the animals in these establishments, or because of the people that ran these establishments, that we kind of just we didn't think widely enough about the consequences of what we were doing.
Yeah. Okay. So you see, I've met a lot of activists now. They've got exactly the same attitude that you have now. They were quite supportive of arson, and then there was they kind of like are in two minds, or they're actually opposed to it now. And I know in what's the direct action film? The one that was made was I can't remember the name of it now. Anyway, there's a direct action film about the A.L.F, and they were talking about how they made sure that the building was empty by repeatedly going back to it. Well, even that is very questionable, in the sense that the more you go back before the action, the more risk you're taking of getting caught.
Yes,
and so
there was a film called From Dusk Till Dawn. Or was
no, that was a book.
That's a book, yeah. There was a book, but there was a film that I know that when Keith Mann was going around promoting his book, he was showing a film at the same time that wasn't called that, but it was.
It wasn't Bold Native. It was something else. Behind the mask.
Behind the mask. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one Keith was showing. Yeah, and but you see, like I think we can talk about things at a deeper level, because these are controversial things that the A.L.F did, but I think also the whole way the A.L.F operated, the whole way we thought, the reasons why we did it and all that. I think although all those things kind of can come into question as well, the A.L.F certainly spared a large numbers of animals, other animals, from suffering and slaughter. During the time that the A.L.F was most active here in the UK, the number of experiments on animals fell really by several million. And if that's attributable to the A.L.F, that's a very, very large animals that have been spared. And then the demise of the fur trade, I think, or the decline of the fur trade in the UK, I think very much attributable to A.L.F actions as well. You see, so there's that's the kind of that's the positive side. So, but could it have been better? Could there have been something different to that? that actually would have been better, that would have furthered the cause of animal liberation even more than the A.L.F.? I think the answer to that is yes. I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I
And
think so.
obviously, you know, what I'm talking about is vegan outreach, vegan education. And I think, you know, I kind of think that, yeah, you know, it's not a question of good and bad. It's a question of good and better. You know, yeah, the A.L.F. There was a lot of good things about the A.L.F. Very good things. There's some questionable things, but there are a lot of good things about the A.L.F. But could there
Yeah.
could there be something better?
Let's move on to the real questionable things then. The stuff that got you into trouble as a press officer.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
particular, because I mean, you know, people talk about full-time activists and everything, but I mean, there was a time when certain actions took place when you were kind of on every kind of news bulletin on just about every platform
Oh yes, yeah.
all day. And so something that people might not know about. So what's the Mars bar controversy, Ronnie?
Well, what you see the Mars company who make for people who don't live in the UK, they make a very, very sweet chocolate confectionery bar. And what they were doing was they were basically testing this on monkeys. They were kind of doing experiments on monkeys, or funding experiments on
They were
monkeys.
just smearing the stuff on their teeth,
Yeah,
weren't they?
they're related to tooth decay, to see
Yeah.
how the teeth would decay and stuff like that. And there was an expose about this, I think, in the national media. And so what happened was some A.L.F. activists actually claimed to have contaminated Mars bars throughout the country. I think with rat poison, and I think that they sent some to the media to show what they'd done. And I think they did place some Mars bars on the shelves of various stores that had kind of been messed about with. They hadn't actually contaminated them, but they looked like someone
They
had
put a
done
big cross on it, didn't they?
something to them. Yeah, you see. So as a result of that, Mars were forced to withdraw all their Mars bars. Mars company withdrew all their Mars bars from all of the stores throughout the UK, and it cost them millions and millions of pounds. It cost them a fortune. And I think subsequent to that, those experiments came to an end. Now, once again, this is kind of controversial because obviously, you know, if there had been rat poison in some of those Mars bars and somebody had eaten the Mars bars, then they would have they they would have suffered, wouldn't they? But I think the way it, you know, the activists who did it justified it within the principles of the A.L.F. was that these Mars bars weren't really contaminated. None of the ones, these odd few that they'd put in the stores, were contaminated at all. They'd just been messed about with, so to look like someone had done something to them. And so it was actually a hoax. And so because they hadn't actually contaminated the bars, they could claim, well, yeah, we didn't threaten life.
I think they had to take down about 6 to 8 million bars.
Absolutely huge numbers.
Yeah.
And what happened with me, I didn't know anything about this. So I got a call from the I got a call from the media about this. And
You must have had a phone by then, Ronnie.
Well, I can't remember how it kind of happened. I mean, this would have been in what year was this? Was this in 80?
I'd say this is 83, 84.
83, 84.
Maybe even 85.
Yeah, I would have been. Yeah, I think. Yeah, we'd have had the. We were
looking at I
would have had a phone by then in the press office. Yeah. So I obviously got a call from the media. Oh, what's this about these Mars bars? I hadn't heard anything about it. You know, Mars bars being contaminated, and we want you to come into the studio and we want to interview you on the morning television show. You see, because it's very early in the morning. I used to go into the office like really early in the morning, so I got this call quite early, and so I kind of went along to the I went like the TV studios for this morning breakfast show type thing. And there was
1984, Ronnie.
Sorry,
1984. I'm just looking.
1984. Yeah,
We were looking at the Hansard before, weren't we? The parliamentary record.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think by then we were either in we probably had the office in Hammersmith by then, I think, and I certainly had a phone there. And so I went along, and what I did was I kind of grabbed some of the newspapers, to read about. I read the newspapers about this, what had happened, because I didn't know anything about it. No one told me anything about it. You see, so I got interviewed by this guy called Frank Boff, who had previously been a football commentator. And
it was kind of like a Piers Morgan of the time.
He was time of Piers Morgan's time, but he was later sacked from his job because he was exposed as kind of having sort of he used to go and see a dominatrix. He used to cane him in a cellar or something like that.
Okay. Well, they'd probably do that on screen nowadays.
And he got he got a warning, and then he did it again, and then he got sacked. I wish I'd known about that because I'd have brought it up in the interview. And he was questioning me about this.
If everybody's consenting, I don't see the problem with that particularly.
No, it's not. But you know what they're like. I mean, he kind of. But I think the thing was his wife didn't know about it, and she was very upset. So it kind of was, and he had kids, and it was all that business, But anyway, so he was saying, I remember he kept saying to me, "It's out of control, isn't it, Mr. Lee? It's out of control." That was the famous words that he said to me about it. And of course, I kind of had to think, sort of just,
think on your feet. You were talking about your bum, I think, Ronnie.
Think. Well, I think, I mean, I'm not the only vegan whose bum is out of control, I'm quite sure. And and it was difficult because I still didn't really know a lot about it. No activists had contacted me about it or anything. I mean, obviously knew about the experiments on monkeys that Mars had been funding. So I kind of said, I think I took the line, well, I understand how people might feel upset about it, but hang on a minute, we're talking about the wrong thing. Let's talk about the monkeys. These monkeys are already being tortured. Somebody's kind of claimed no one's going to be harmed by this Mars bars thing because they've all been removed by the shops, so no one's going to be harmed, but the monkeys are being harmed. And I tried to turn it that way, as I remember in the interview.
I think it's important to say that it was actually a hoax, but you didn't know.
It was a hoax. It was a hoax. None of the Mars bars had. I don't know whether any that had been sent to the media had actually been contaminated, but
I think they'd been injected. Been
injected with something, but the ones in the shops that people have messed about with, they did not contain rat poison, so nobody could have been harmed.
But you didn't know at the time, right? Did you? So
I didn't know at the time, but I kind of presumed that they wouldn't have been. But they were all removed from the shops anyway, so nobody would buy any that and come to any harm in any case.
Well, there's also that thing about people may have bought them and not consumed them, and there was that. I sort of thought to myself, no, this is so. So we've got so there was quite a few contaminations in the end. There was and stuff like this, and it was all. I mean, I don't think. Was there any that was kind of genuine, or was it all hoax?
I think. Well, the one with Lucasade, because I think that company were involved in some sort of animal experiments. Lucasade is like a kind of. It was meant to be some kind of fizzy.
It used to be called the Hotel Champagne, didn't it?
It was just like fizzy pop, really, that claimed to have some kind of health benefits while destroying your teeth. And it wasn't the claim that people pissed in it, didn't they? Say they pissed in the Lucasade, wasn't that the? I think
they might have urinated. Ronnie is the word you're looking for.
No, it was definitely. If it's A.L.F. activists, it was definitely pissed.
Yeah. What do you think of this? Debbie is speculating about whether it was a genuine act. I think again, you wouldn't know, would you? Really?
Well, I think, and I don't think it was a scam because it caused the Mars company a massive loss in revenue, and B, they stopped the experiments afterwards.
No,
So
no, but I mean, say it was somebody like Alan Newbury Street. Don't forget, right? This is Alan Newbury Street is a hunter who planted a nail bomb on his own Land Rover, right? And he got caught. He actually released a press release saying the Animal Rights Society, which didn't exist, and all that. And so he got nicked. He ended up getting 9 months in prison, but he asked for other similar offences to be taken into consideration during the
So you don't know what he did, but
so, yeah, I mean, like, so what would stop him doing this then?
well, it maybe didn't, except that it kind of it certainly brought an end to those experiments and financially harmed the company that was funding them.
But this Newbury Street said that the reason he did this, planted a bomb on his own Land Rover, a nail bomb on his own Land Rover. I mean, I don't think the A.L.F. knew how to construct bombs at the time.
No.
Yeah, and so because that became a thing in terms of what we're going to talk about next, which is the incendiaries. The idea was we moved from incendiaries, which were two firelighters, to real bombs. And even the police didn't think that was what happened.
No.
Yeah.
So I think there was some of this kind of black operations kind of going on, whatever you name you'd give to it, by either the authorities or kind of people on the side of the animal oppressors to kind of was the idea to kind of discredit the activists. I kind of don't know. I don't think any of these things were like claimed by the A.L.F. They kind of were claimed, either not claimed or they were claimed under very strange names that didn't appear to exist, of groups, weren't they?
That one certainly was. It was called the Animal Rights Society. I wrote about that in my PhD.
There was a bomb at Bristol University. Was it Bristol University? They found
that was real Semtex, and the police always said that.
And that's really weird because
So that again has got to be somebody trying to discredit.
Yeah, I think,
or some kind of maverick type situation.
It could have been, It could have been that. So there was an element of controversy over the kind of these hoaxes, and there was a few of them. I think there was one where, was it Sunsilk shampoo, that there'd been a claim that bleach had been put in shampoo.
Oh, I don't remember that one.
Yeah, there was, and that was once again to do with
it'll be vivisection, wouldn't it? All these.
There was a lot of focus of the A.L.F. was on vivisection. Yeah.
Whereas the incendiary devices, so this is the last one. They were based on attacking the fur trade, but in a particular way, because at the time, just about every city had a department store, and within that, one of the departments was a fur department. So. I was running this thing called the Edelson Action Group, and that was Michael Edelson, who was a Manchester United director, but he also owned this fur company. And so I think he did have a couple of shops, but generally speaking, most of his business was done inside these department stores. So there was something that we devised called the Fur Pledge campaign. So we asked people to boycott the entire department store because of that one aspect of it. Now, obviously, from a vegan point of view, you're kind of going, okay, well, what about the butcher shop? You've got all that. Absolutely. So again, it's all single issue and all that.
That's right. It was.
Hold our hands up to this problem. But then the other idea was then, what we can do some real damage by so somebody devised these things which were called incendiary devices. Of course.
Yes.
The police said, going back to this, I was called a fire bomber. Okay. But, I've never seen one of these incendiaries, not even, the actual incendiary. I've never even seen a real one. The nearest I got to them was, I saw a picture of them at the trial, but I've never actually seen one. Yeah.
Well, what happened with me was I got this call at the press office, and this would have been, I don't know. It was late. What are we talking about? 85. It was either kind of late in 1985 or very early in 86. I got this call, say, look, we need to talk to you. Like, we're in Sheffield, got something, can you come up to Sheffield to meet us? And I think they said at the railway station at a particular time. So I thought, what the hell this is about? It's really important. This is like really, really important.
You had to wear a red rose, did you?
Well, I think they probably knew what I looked like. I didn't know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
They looked like. And anyway, I went up there and I was met by this group of people and taken to this to a flat, I think. And they showed me this incendiary device. It was in a cigarette packet, and it comprised of the firelighters. There was a watch face and some wires and match heads, I think, and a battery, small battery. And the idea was, when the hands came together, it would create a circuit, and that in turn would ignite the match heads, and then that would ignite the fire.
It would set off the little bulb, but the bulb had the outer glass.
I think that was I think that was right. I think that's where they get that's where the heating came from that set fire to the match heads.
Yeah, and then that set fire to the
and they said the reason we've got you up here is because so that when you get contacted by the media, you'll know what you're talking about. You see, and they said that what the plan is to plant these. The idea is to plant them in the furniture department of stores that have fur departments, because they felt the furniture department was the best place of kind of, down the side of a settee or something like that. And then the idea was to start a small fire in order to operate the sprinkler system, so that the sprinklers would come on and cause water damage to the store. See, that was their idea.
But even the small fire thing needs to be, and I think we all ought to say that, Ronnie and I have moved on, so this is not incitement or anything, people. But we wouldn't have done this kind of stuff back in the day. If we'd have thought about vegan education years ago, then this stuff wouldn't be.
No, it would never have happened. It's just like
But in terms of the fire. All the furniture in those days, and still now, fire retardant is called, right? So it means it resists catching fire.
It's resistant. It is resistant.
So it creates a lot of smoke, right?
You get a lot of smoke, right?
Yeah, so that was the issue.
But I think eventually you'd probably get a fire. But you see, initially you'd get a lot of smoke, and it would set off the sprinklers. And so their idea, they never thought that the store would burn down. The idea was to cause water damage. And this was in Sheffield, and actually what they did was they made a huge mistake of the first store they attacked was a store in their own cities, Rackham.
Yeah, Rackham's, wasn't it?
Rackham's. And what happened was, it went through to plan. It caused hundreds of £1,000s worth of water damage because the sprinkler came on, and the store was closed for a while. And and I think the store stopped selling fur quite soon after that. And so that went.
Imagine the amount of damage done by water, because it would all run down the escalator.
Oh yeah, it was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage. Kind of stuff, yeah, and so that worked, and then kind of. But what happened was, the police in Sheffield, started looking for. They thought, well, obviously these are animal rights activists. They brought in the drug squad to deal with it, because the drug squad were kind of more expert in surveillance than any of the other kind of police squads. And so it was the drug squad that investigated it, and they ended up like kind of homing in on a group of activists, and these activists were having meeting. I think it might be the same flat that I went to. It was a first floor flat, first floor apartment, and what they did was they kind of agreed with the person living on the ground floor to put a listening device up through the ceiling, so it was like under the floorboards of the first floor flat, and they recorded the conversation of these activists as they was talking about assembling one of these devices. And they arrested. In the February they arrested. This February of '86, they arrested a group of activists in Sheffield in connection with this. And I kind of didn't think I was at any risk. I thought, well, I kind of hope they don't mention that I'd been up there or anything. And then time went by, and I thought, no, nothing's going to happen. And then our office was raided, and where I lived was raided, and I got arrested and charged with conspiracy. I mean, it wasn't just to do with that, but it was to do with the whole operation, my whole operation as press officer, really.
Well, I know we showed this before, and you're mentioned about 60 times in this. I mentioned 4 times, and most of it is wrong, including, it says here, Roger Yates, the A.L.F's Northern Press Officer based in Liverpool, were frequent, talking about me and Viv, were frequent visitors at the end of Terrace House where tactics were planned and targets selected. This was the home of Brendan McNally. But what they're trying to suggest, because I did go and speak to Brendan McNally because I knew him as a SAB. We also knew him because through the BOAV and everything else. I mean, Brendan was a big name back then. But what they're suggesting is that that's where the incendiaries were constructed, and that wasn't true.
No, it wasn't true at all. No.
So I never knew. The people who made the incendiaries, I never met them until we ended up on trial.
No. See, I'd met them at that meeting that I'd had, but where they got me to go to Sheffield. But what happened was somebody created a document, which it was like an A4 sheet, I think, as I remember, that laid out how to make these devices, and printed a load of them and just sent them off to loads of animal rights activists all throughout the country. So what happened was other groups, A.L.F. Groups, started making these incendiaries independently from the plans that they'd been sent, and that's why it spread all over the country. It wasn't this same group of people from, and this was long after the Sheffield group were behind bars, and these things were happening all over the place. I mean, there was an attack down in Plymouth.
You say that, Ronnie, but the people who actually planted the devices, they didn't get a sentence. It was us who were the press, because they wanted to shut us up as an organisation.
Well, no, the people in Sheffield that were involved in planting the incendiaries and making them they got 4 years. But but you also got 4 years, and I got 10 years, and we were the press officers.
Well, I'll have to check that, because I've got a different memory of that. But then again, don't forget, I wasn't there. So
they each, there were 4. There were 3 people involved in the group that were involved with the incendiaries, and plus Brendan as well. And Brendan wasn't really involved with them, so how he kind of was brought into it, I don't know.
There's a guy called Ian, wasn't there? But there was a woman as well. She got acquitted, surely, the woman.
There was one woman who got a lesser sentence.
Oh, okay.
And Izzy someone. There was Gary, Ian, and Kevin with the guys. With the guys that were sent to jail.
Called Cartwright, wasn't there?
Gary Cartwright, Kevin Baldwin, and Ian. I can't remember Ian's second name.
Loxley or something like that. Or...
No, I can't. But there's those 3. They were the ones that were kind of involved in. And there was a guy called John Hewson who supplied the watches, and he got off with a suspended sentence because he turned Queen's evidence. Although I don't think
what that means.
Well, in other words, he agreed to give evidence for the prosecution, although he never actually gave evidence for prosecution, because the people he was going to give evidence against, those people in Sheffield, pleaded guilty, and so he was never called to give evidence. But he was going to. He would have done had they pleaded not guilty. So he wasn't very popular. Wasn't very popular. That was
okay. Again, that was a detail I didn't know, that some people pleaded guilty and others not guilty. Then, the
people in Sheffield, with the exception of Brendan, the people who actually were involved in sort of planting the devices and everything, they pleaded guilty. They didn't plead guilty straight away. They pleaded guilty while the trial was going on.
Oh, okay.
But Brendan pleaded not guilty because Brendan wasn't kind of really that involved with them.
This is our conspiracy chart.
It was conspiracy, so it was like guilt by association.
I mean, they're perfect charges, really, because, like I say, I've never seen one of these things, and yet, you know, it means that, you know, journalists and the press can say all these kind of lies about, you know.
but you see, I think the conspiracy charges weren't just related to the incentivized. I mean, that was a big part of it, but I think it included the whole of the kind of operation of the A.L.F, didn't it? As well as that, because
I think they're the most controversial of the things. Especially, I suppose, what would you say was the most controversial? Mars bars, do you think?
It's kind of say they were all controversial at the time they occurred, but
it's a weird thing, isn't it? About the passage of time, because those things are kind of probably unknown in the history of the movement, really. I mean, like, nobody refers to it. Nobody knows about it.
No, they don't, because the passage of time, also because it's probably not a lot on YouTube and stuff like that about it, and it's not on social media. And
well, there is now.
There is now, but I mean, you were dealing with a completely new generation, aren't we now? That kind of, you know, don't know a great deal about the history of the movement, and I think sadly, quite often don't want to know about it.
We've got a new set of extremists now because they hold laptops in the street. Anyway, now one part, just to finish with, one part that I didn't know until this when we were setting up for this, is that there was a Midlands press office.
Yeah, there was Midlands press office, because you became the Northern press officer, but there was a guy that came forward and said that he was willing to be the Midland press officer. So I kind of, you know, sort of set him up. I got him an answering machine, because an answering machine was very important in those days.
Yeah, I had one of those. Yeah,
he put his number out to, you know, the media and that, because I was getting so many calls from the press, it was difficult to deal with them. So having these regional press officers was really useful. And anyway, but he fell out of favour with the local activists, and they accused him of like cooperating with the police or something like that, and that, you know, there was bad feeling. And so you know, I came to a mutual agreement with him that he would he would give up the job of the Midlands press officer.
You said this was a funny story, Ronnie.
The funny story is
okay.
What happened was, I was living in London at the time, and I was there was this program on the telly in Birmingham. I think it was from the Pebble Mill studios that used to exist in Birmingham, and it was basically, they would get a load of like animal rights people. They would get people from opposing sides on a kind of hot issue in the studio, and basically it ended up with people shouting at each other and all that. And it was like, kind of, they thought viewers would like this, and that was what
like
it was
a Kilroy type thing. It was called, wasn't it?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it was. I forget the exactly. Central, was it? I can't. Central something it might have been called. I can't remember the exact name. Anyway, there was one of these where they were going to get like a lot of animal rights activists who were campaigning on various issues, and then people representing the industries that these people were opposing. Like they had people from the fur trade and people involved in animal experimentation, in farming, etc. So that there would be this big confrontation. That's what they wanted. And anyway, I got invited up to take part in this. So I went up to Birmingham, and I was in the studio, and there was like a kind of a waiting area before you went into the studio, where they were giving people drinks and stuff. You know,
a green room.
It was kind of like a very big green room, because there was like, there'd be like a kind of, the audience would be kind of full of, you know, I was in the audience, but then there'd be like other animal rights activists in the audience. There'd be people from, you know, the various industries of animal oppression would be in the audience as well. And they'd have some people on stage, and then people in the audience would be allowed to say things, put your hand up, and they pick you, and you'd say something, and there'd be a big, like a big rear up and stuff. That's what they wanted. Anyway, so we were all milling around. And of course, there were farmers milling around, and there were animal experimenters running around, and we were all mixed together, which probably wasn't a good idea. And anyway, what I'd said to this chap, because he lived in the Midlands, I said, look, I'll be in, I'm coming up for this program, so that'd be an opportunity for you to bring me back the answering machine, you see. So he said, okay. So for some reason he was able to get into this area, because I don't think they really monitored people very much who were coming in for some reason. And so he came in, with this answer machine, like wrapped up in brown paper, you see.
Oh,
Gave
wow.
it, he said, yeah, hold on, you see. And this farmer, there was a farmer, he said, oh, who are you? Is that a bomb you've got there? Is that a bomb? And I said, yes. I said, it is a bomb.
Is that the way you talk like in Birmingham?
Well, no, all farmers, wherever they're from.
Oh, okay.
Like
yeah, right. nothing like a
stereotype. In Birmingham. There was no farming in Birmingham. I mean, it'd been from somewhere else. Like, is that a bomb you've got there? Is that a bomb? I said, yes. I said, it is. And I'm about to go and put it under your car. That's what I said to him.
Okay, and you ended up doing the program anyway. They didn't throw you off because of that, no?
No.
Yeah. I think we've all got some strange stories. The weirdest one, I think I might have, if I've told this one before, stop me. But it was a really weird one because I used to live, when we did the press office, I used to live in a place called Speak, and this was Liverpool 24, and in a place called Speak Hall, there was a fur farm, a rabbit farm. Ronnie's frozen. Hey, Ronnie, come back.
I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You just froze.
I don't know what happened now. I don't know whether that's
with your mug like this.
And yeah, you froze as well.
All right. Well, okay. Well, I seem to carry on. But anyway, we decided to go and have a look at this fur farm. We came back from city centre. Had a look at this fur farm. We couldn't see much. We're on this kind of rise, looking over and all that kind of. Couldn't see much really, and then went back home, which was like 2 miles away from this place. Got back there, put the answer machine on, and there was a report from an A.L.F cell saying that they'd raided the place overnight, and we didn't know. But just by coincidence, that day we'd gone to have a look at this place that we'd always meant to have a look at, this kind of stuff. Yeah. It was really weird because there was a lot of collusion between the farmer and the police in that time. And luckily, going back to the press, I had a good relationship with somebody from, it was either Radio City or the BBC. Radio City in Liverpool was the independent. And then there was BBC Radio Merseyside. And I had a good relationship with a couple of journalists there. The farmer said that the activists had killed 100 rabbits. And so I contacted this journalist and said, look, let's arrange to go and see them, the dead bodies, right? And the police had confirmed that this was true and all that. So the journalist contacted the thing, the farmer then said, no, they haven't killed them. They've blinded them. And so the journalist was getting a bit cheesed off at this point and said, okay, well, I still want to come and see the blind ones. And then the police stepped in and said, oh, no, this is a crime scene. You're not allowed to come and all that. So it was one of those things where the police and the farmer were getting together just to put up a bullshit story in order to kind of discredit the activists. Yeah. So typical kind of thing. Because what they'd done is they were using tactics from the kind of SEAL campaigns. And because these particular rabbits were used in the fur trade, they were kind of bright white, New Zealand whites, I suppose, but they were so popular for vivisection. But I think they sprayed them with indelible dye to try, and all do that. And so that's why they came up with the idea that they'd killed them, and then when that didn't work, that they blinded them. Yeah, and that didn't work either. That's the way it works, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I remember that there'd been I took part in a raid when I was press officer, because I still used to do things. And I took part in a raid in a place in North London that kind of supplied equipment for sort of battery farms that kind of made the cages that supplied the debeaking equipment and stuff. And I think we wrecked their office or something. And anyway, it was strange because the press phoned me up about it as the press officer, and I spoke about it. But what the press did was they gave my number to the guy that ran the business, you see. So he phoned me up and he said, "Oi," he said, "you bastards, you've, destroyed my office. I'll probably go out of business because of you bastards and all that." He said, "I know where you are." He said, "I know from your telephone number you're in Hammersmith." He said, "I'm going to come to Hammersmith and I'm going to sort you out." And I said to him, "No need to do that." I said, "Let's arrange a time and place. We'll arrange a time and place. Give me a time and place and I'll come there." And I said, and we can fight. I said, "We can fight." I said, "But I tell you what, when we do fight," I said, I'll fight you to the death. I will fight to the death." And he just
your swashbuckling days, was it, Ronnie?
Yeah. If he'd seen me, probably he wouldn't be taken in by it. Some little bald bloke with glasses, but like he thought, "Shit, fucking hell, who is this bloke?" He just put the phone down.
By the way, I'm 7 foot tall.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a karate black belt expert. But I think before we end, I think it is important to kind of talk about the A.L.F. in more general terms, as I kind of referred to previously. That the huge kind of not failure of the A.L.F., but where the A.L.F. was, I think, lacking in terms of achieving animal liberation. Because the thing about the A.L.F., it was impossible that it could do what its name said, which was bring about animal liberation. And the reason for that was because there was no interaction between the A.L.F. and the public. The A.L.F. was really just it was like a direct war against the people that oppressed other animals, wasn't it? And the public were just on the sideline, and where that's where that that sort of strategy and why that strategy won't deliver animal liberation is because we're never going to get animal liberation while the vast majority of people don't believe in it, while the vast majority of people are still speciesist and human supremacist. So unless we educate those people to change, we're not going to get very far. And of course, there was really no educational component about the A.L.F. at all. I think the press office did try to inform people about the reasons why people did the action, but it certainly wasn't vegan outreach. And so that's really why the A.L.F. kind of achieved a certain amount, but it could go no further than that because there was no educational element to it.
It never even crossed our minds, did it, Ronnie?
No, it didn't cross our minds at all because we were carrying on in the same vein. As I said, like that, the movement carried on the same as it had before it became militant and before it became grassroots. These single issue campaigns, aimed at trying to close places down, put places out of business and stuff like that. It was that was the focus. It was on supply, as it had kind of always been previously to that. We carried on the same. We never thought about vegan outreach. We were vegan and we thought it was important to be vegan, but we never thought about educating other people to be vegan and the importance of that. But you see, I think that direct action can be used as an awareness raising tool and can be used to promote veganism. But I think that would have to be a very different type of direct action to what the A.L.F. did, because what we did was like kind of it was very serious in terms of criminality. With what the actions we did, would carry many years in prison, and indeed, people did receive many years in prison for many people did, for A.L.F. actions. But the type the type of direct action that you'd use for awareness raising doesn't need to be at all like that. It can be where the level of
So we're into kind of animal rising kind of
we're into
areas,
the sort of stuff that animal rising, the type of stuff that animal rising do, like dairy blockades for people, people chain themselves to trucks, and where they, people
open rescue would be another one, wouldn't it? Open rescue.
And open rescue, and things like that. That type of direct action, where people aren't trying to get away, they don't try to get away. And in fact, a really important element of it is that even people just wait around to be arrested or give themselves up, because that's very strong in terms of awareness. If you're trying to raise awareness, you're trying to make people think, you're trying to get people to change. The fact that you're not running away, the fact you're saying, yes, I'm here, I did this. I'm here. I did the right thing, and I'm not trying to hide. I'm not trying to run away. That's very powerful. But of course, if you've done something that could end you up with 10 years in prison, you are going to run away, aren't you? Like we did, And quite often the planning of that, there was more planning with A.L.F actions put into how to get away than to actually how to do the action. And it was like that. And it's kind of, and from a practical point of view, nowadays, certainly in the UK, it kind of would really be impossible to get away with a lot of things we did get away with because of surveillance, because there's so much surveillance now on the roads, and loads of places now have got a level of security that they never had back in the day, because we've been in the digital age now. It's so cheap and easy to install that. So we're dealing with a completely different landscape in terms of
an average farm couldn't afford cameras and stuff, and
no,
they didn't even lock the doors most of the time.
No, they didn't. No. The only places that really had any considerable level of security were laboratories, and that was because there was expensive equipment in there, and they might have a security guard, and they probably would have some kind of camera system, but that would just operate a videotape. It wouldn't be digital. It wouldn't be computerized. We didn't have, didn't really have computers back in the day. And so it's completely different now in terms of what you can get away with. And so the direct action now is where people aren't trying to get away, and in fact, not trying to get away is part of the messaging. Is gives strength to the messaging. The only criticism I've got of groups really like, Animal Rising, and I think DXC as well, certainly in the USA, is that they don't promote veganism in their messaging. And that's, to me, that's a huge shame and a really big failure. But if that kind of direct action could be used as awareness raising,
it's a bit ironic, isn't it, Ronnie? Because back in the day, there was a lot of serious stuff going on, but no vegan education attached to it because it couldn't have done. Whereas now you've got the kind of direct action which is conducive to go with vegan education, and yet they don't mention veganism, and so
they don't mention it. No,
so it's quite frustrating in a way that
and it's a huge missed opportunity. The actions are good, but the messaging isn't there.
Because I was saying, wasn't I, that if, say, we were tuned into vegan education, we had it all sussed out. I mean, we'd even said before we came on, we never even had a meeting to talk about what we would say to the press.
No,
it was So we didn't have we didn't have a branding idea. We didn't have a company line. We didn't. Well, if they say this, say that, and all, we didn't do any of that, right? And so, But if we had done, and we thought, okay, we can really push veganism through this.
But would be
my question was, would that meant that the damage would have gone down and the rescue would have gone up because of the popularity of the one and the unpopularity of the other?
You see, the aim of the aim. You see, I was really, I wasn't, I kind of wasn't like, in a sense, I was much more a fan of the damage than of the rescue, because I saw that I looked at the rescuers just in terms, because even in those days, I realized that if you rescue say 20 animals from a breeding place, a supplier to laboratories, or even from a laboratory, that it's great for those animals, but they're just going to be replaced by 20 others. So you're not saving, you're kind of, in a sense, saving one lot of animals but condemning another lot of animals, right? And so and the only possible loss you're causing to that business is the value of those animals, right? And within a few seconds, you could probably do damage that would equate to the value of those animals. So I was valued the damage much greater than the rescue, because to me the idea was to cause these places so much economic loss that they went out of business. And I saw that animal rescue wasn't a really efficient way of causing them economic loss, and that damage was. And I used to get really frustrated with some of the A.L.F groups that just wanted to concentrate on animal rescue. And they would put together a really quite complicated and intricate plan to rescue animals, which often had to do with animal rescue, because you had to get them away, you had to have homes found or places for them to go. It was quite complicated. Where they managed to break into a place, sometimes having to bypass alarms or having to do that in a quite intricate way to get into the place. They'd rescue the animals, but they wouldn't damage any of the equipment in there. They wouldn't cause damage to any property. And it would really frustrate me. I said, look, you had an ideal opportunity to cause masses of damage, far greater than the value of the animals you rescued, but you didn't do it. And it used to really do my head in that they kind of were just so fixated on the animal rescue and not doing the damage. I used to get really kind of, because I kind of didn't see it in terms of awareness raising or anything like that.
Well, the thing is, though, if you think about the name, Ronnie, the Animal Liberation Front, direct liberation of other animals, right?
I thought about it in a bigger way,
Yeah,
as I kind of still do, really. That, animal liberation, that we liberate all animals from oppression, and so I saw it in that bigger way. I wasn't opposed to the rescue. And what we came up with in the end was this plan where you'd have two teams of people, where you'd have people that made an entry into the place, then they'd pull back, then the people would go in and rescue the animals, and they'd go away, and then the original group of people would go back in and cause a load of damage. And that was a blueprint that we had. And that
sounds overly complicated. That one.
Well, not really, because if people were going to rescue the animals anyway,
if you've got to go in twice, you're taking a big risk then, aren't you?
Well, but you see, otherwise you're kind of risking getting the animals away, because the idea, once you get the animals out, you want to get them away as quickly as possible. You don't want to wait around with the animals while someme's causing damage. Do you see what I mean? So
I get the idea. It's just
the idea, but it kind of did add. But I mean, the people that were taking the most risk were the ones that went back into.
I'd never heard of that before. That's
no, we did. There were. I think really, it probably was the people I knew the most who were activists, who would have been down in the south, and that.
I've learned a lot. So any police officers watching,
that did happen, and that was what I used to propose.
This guy here,
I used these groups that were really fixated just on the rescue. I used to propose that to them. The ones I knew, because there was loads of A.L.F activists I didn't know at all, but ones I knew, I'd say, well, why not do this? You'll rescue the animals, but you've already, taken the trouble of making an entry into this place. So have a couple of people. You only need two, get the animals away. Two, you go back and do a bit of rescuing.
There's also the media part of it, because obviously the activists knew that the mass media would be keen, but there was also the movement's media that would be kind of going, well, look, there's nothing better for us than publish that type of picture. So that kind of put a bit of emphasis on it too, didn't it?
Yeah, I think there are groups like the BUAV loved the animal rescue, but they weren't so keen on the damage.
For obvious reasons, though, Ronnie.
Well, because of course that, because it gave a better image that there's these people, they rescue the
Yeah.
animals and all that. But to me, at the time, because what happened, this idea of economic sabotage developed over time, because the first damage that we did when back in the days of the Band of Mercy was it was to do damage it was preventative damage. In other words, we'd go to the hunt headquarters, go to their kennels, and we cause a small amount of damage to their vehicles to actually prevent them going out hunting. We'd maybe slash the tires, we put tacks in the locks, in the ignition and stuff like that. We didn't burn the vehicles or anything like that. We did what we thought would stop them. And that kind of even continued into the days of the A.L.F. Like, there was a story where some people did a raid, and it was the offices of a laboratory or something, and they were talking to me about this afterwards, and they said, "Oh yeah, we found £100 on the table of this guy's office." I said, "What do you do with it?" I said, "Have you got it?" "Oh no, we tore it in half and left it there." I said, "Would you do that? Why didn't you take it?" And they said, "Oh, because we didn't want to be seen as common thieves." And I said, "Well, look, you could have took that to finance further
What was the
raids,
point of tearing it in half?
just so it'd be no use to them, but it wasn't being." But
No, you can actually sellotape.
well, yeah, but I don't
Yeah.
know, but maybe didn't occur to them. But you see, but and I said that was bonkers. Take it, deprive them of it, because I think I knew that they could
Well, the
sell it.
bonkers bit is tearing it in half.
Tear it in half. It was a symbolic thing. You see,
you either take it or you just leave
yeah, I
it.
know, but we got to the stage when I was involved in a group in North London, and we had an old car which there was only one of us working that had some kind of not a very well paid job, and he had a car, like it was a bit of an old wreck, and so we'd all chip in to help with the finances, and we're all on the dole, and so we kind of we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford to keep going out doing raids. So what we used to do was, when we raided a place, we used to take all the office equipment. Instead of like destroying it, we used to take it, and I used to take it to a second-hand place and sell it, and to get money. And if we found money, we'd take the money and use the money to fund further action.
You're just a common criminal, you are, Ronnie Lee.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you did. But it was really funny, some of the attitudes of people, because there was a guy in Cambridgeshire. He was an ex-army major or someone, and he was breeding pigs and sheep for experiments, you see. And we raided his place, a group of us from London, and I'd never sort of worked with these people before, and we went up there, and we went in there, and we wrecked his office. And like coming home in the car, we were talking about what we did. Everyone was on a high, of course, and there was, one person said, "Oh, I smashed up his typewriter," and another one said, "Well, I broke his phone," and then the third one said, "Oh, I smashed his photocopier," and I said, "Oh, I jumped on his glasses," and suddenly it all went quiet, and they said, "You what? You what?" And I said, "I jumped on his glasses." They said, "No, we're not working with you again. That's totally unacceptable. Jumping on his glasses, totally unacceptable." And I said, "Well," I said to me, I said, "The only pity was he wasn't wearing them at the time." But they viewed that as being like out of order.
You've gone too far, Ronnie Lee.
Oh yeah, they said that you've gone too far. You've gone too far, because
the story of your life, mate.
I said,
The
"Well, look,
story
he
of your
wears
life.
those glasses when he's like, doing all his thing in connection with his business, sending these animals. He's wearing those glasses, so they're a legitimate target."
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, from a sociological point of view, that's almost like a class thing, middle class versus and all that. All the kind of working class lads in prison, when they found out that what I was in for, they were first of all dumbfounded that I didn't get paid, because they wouldn't have done anything for not getting paid, and then they were saying, "Why are you messing around like this? Why don't you just get the job done? I mean, if you get 50 quid together, we can go and break their legs or something." But they said, what you do with the vivisector, you grab them, tie them to a tree, break their hands with baseball bats, and then they'll never do it again. They were incredibly practical. And there's me, the terrorist, going, you can't do that.
I know. It's weird, but it was even like people had these kind of sort of strange principles, like with the not taking the money and not agreeing with me jumping on the bloke's glasses and stuff like that.
Well, again, from a class-based point of view, middle class values, you can understand where they're coming from, but it's a bit weird in the context.
It kind of is, but we ended up like just taking stuff and selling it, just because that's the only way we could keep going, because we didn't have money.
Yeah,
and we sometimes
do you think
deliberately.
that was common, Ronnie, because I'd never heard of that either before. That one.
Well, I don't know. It was what our group did, and we'd even. I remember we went that same place that I told you about, where I jumped on the bloke's glasses. There was a different group of us. The group, because the group that I started working with had a different attitude, and we actually, because
you went back and there was a pair of rubber glasses there.
We went back to that same bloke's place, and instead of smashing up his office equipment, we took it, and I went in the second-hand shop, and they said, "Oh, where did you get this from?" I said, "Oh, it's from my dad's business. He's given up his business." And the bloke said, "Oh, all right, here's like a couple of £100." And that was it. They never asked. Nowadays, it would be all much more vetted than that. But in those days, no, they just give you the money, and that's what we did. We deliberately went there because we needed money, and we knew he had office equipment.
You can't injure. Yeah, it's interesting. All that kind of debate about whether you can be violent, to buildings and stuff and all that, isn't it?
But it's kind of strange because it wasn't. There were these differences of opinion, like within the A.L.F, as I said, with various things like to do with the animal rescue.
That's the thing. You see, that's another thing. I mean, if you think about AV and all the kind of hierarchical groups that exist, it wasn't like that. There was kind of no leadership. I mean, no. there was a kind of organization in terms of press office and everything, but that's that, and then people would orient towards you because you're a known person. But in terms of general, I mean, the North, there was nothing like that. I mean, nobody consulted with you, or at least not generally speaking. I mean, I know that there was some things going on, but I suppose really, from a modern day point of view, it sounds a bit chaotic and amateurist. But from then, when it was kind of more like anarchic principles, and the fact that we didn't want a rule book.
Well, you see, I think the fact that it was, the fact that it was autonomous, the fact that there was no kind of hierarchy, was kind of beneficial in two ways. First of all, it allowed it to spread, because people weren't waiting around. They'd been given orders from the top. They were just, people were just like encouraged just to do their own thing. As long as your action falls within these certain principles, you can call it the A.L.F. So there was no kind of people waiting around to be told what to do. They went and did it. So that enabled it to spread rapidly. And of course, it rapidly spread all around the world. And the second thing was that it meant that it made it very, very difficult for the authorities to destroy the A.L.F. And the A.L.F. actually remained highly active for 30 years, and for an organization that was doing so much, against the law and some really serious criminal stuff, certainly in terms of damage, that's sort of incredible, really. And the reason for that was because there was no leadership they could take out and destroy the organization. Like that, in our trial, they gave us all ranks, didn't they? I was the general. I don't know, what rank were you given?
I was a lieutenant.
A lieutenant,
or lieutenant.
A lieutenant. And then there was foot soldiers, weren't they? The people from Sheffield that actually, so you got to salute me. I go like that. Yeah. And that was to kind of, because that's the way they think. They think in that hierarchical way, don't they? The police and everything.
I think it is the only way that the prosecution and the police and could make sense of the A.L.F. because they had to have somebody giving orders, and then they had to make that.
I was put in jail. I was in jail for 6 years and 8 months, right, in the mid-80s, right. But it didn't stop anything. I mean, the A.L.F. carried on highly active for at least 15 years after that. You know?
Yeah, it actually says that in this book. It said that when we got nicked, the activism carried on, but it was a little bit lower key, not as kind of, because I mean clearly they wanted to
That
close the
wasn't true
press
though.
office, but they wanted to close the press office down, didn't they?
Well, they kind of did succeed in closing the press office, because what happened was, I mean, Robin Lane, who became the press officer after me, he was put in prison as well. I think he got 9 months. I mean, because he hadn't been press officer as long as me, so he didn't get nearly as long as me. And so it became like a kind of poison chalice to be the press officer. And eventually, there was no one who was the press officer. And then Robin Webb became the press officer, and he was press officer for quite a few years. And he escaped a jail sentence. I think he was in prison on remand for something, and he was acquitted.
And there was no more regional ones, was there, Ronnie?
No more regional ones. And then of course, then that role disappeared. But of course, there's been a huge decline in A.L.F activity, particularly in the UK. I mean, the UK used to be the main hotbed of activity, and now there are other countries where there is actually more A.L.F activity than in the UK. And I think a lot of that is to do with the surveillance we have over here, and it's really, really difficult to get away with things.
And that's places like mainland Europe and the States, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot in Germany. They do a lot of stuff to hunting towers in Germany. It seems to be, but it seems to be like
there can't be any less surveillance in Germany than there is in Britain.
Well, I think the UK is the most surveilled nation in the world in terms of like closed circuit television. In terms of so there is a lot more surveillance. Yeah, I mean, I think it's increased all over the world because of the digital age. But I think it kind of is probably worse over here, and you can't.
What do you think of this question, Ronnie? Because this is a bit tricky. Really. Is there still a place for A.L.F activity?
Well, for me, the way forward in terms of direct action would be with awareness raising, and I think if someone is prepared to break the law and prepared to face the consequences of that, I would sooner that they used direct action in terms of promoting vegan education. I'd sooner they used it as an awareness raising exercise, and that the messaging was to promote veganism.
Yeah, but okay, but what about this one? So we've talked about the kind of Patty Mark type open rescue type stuff. Now that can be conducive for vegan education, but even if it was closed rescue A.L.F type balaclavas for the press, and then a press office again, that would work as well, wouldn't it?
Well, I think if it was rescue, I think if you're doing rescue,
that's what I mean. If it was rescue only, as it were, almost.
I think it was rescue only. You could, but you see, I think there's
no jumping on people's glasses, Ronnie.
Well, no, because that isn't. You see, if you're trying to put pressure on an industry, if you're trying to make people feel threatened, if you're trying to cause them economic loss, then you do those things. That's kind of goes in tandem with that. But if you're trying to raise awareness, then being violent or aggressive in any way is counterproductive to that message. So that's why it's, I mean, I'm not a pacifist. I think, sometimes, the use of force is justifiable. But I think in terms of tactics, it's really important if you're doing an awareness raising direct action, it's really, really important that it's non-violent from a tactical point of view. Really important. And because otherwise it gets in the way, because you're doing the action in order to put out a message.
So your answer to that question then is yes, it could happen so long as it was. But
you see, the kind of difficulty is first of all, in terms of the animal rescue. I mean, certainly here in the UK, it would be really hard for those people to avoid arrest because of the surveillance. Right, if they really wanted to arrest these people, there's cameras on.
Yeah. So
what's happened over here is the animals. You see, with for instance, there's been animal rising actions where they've rescued they rescued animals. They rescued some beagles from MBR acres. They rescued some lambs from a farm, didn't they? A couple of months back. Now those animals got away. Those animals were taken to safety and were not recovered. Right. I think
could you not call that the A.L.F then?
Well, the reason why it kind of wasn't the A.L.F was because afterwards the people gave themselves up to the police.
Yeah, but couldn't there be an A.L.F like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there could be an A.L.F where people rescued animals and said, yeah, we've rescued animals, and the messaging going with that promoted veganism. Yeah, there could be.
Well, I mean,
yes,
to be honest, if you've got some people who doing a direct action, wait to be arrested, and they say we're the Animal Liberation Front, that's better than saying we're Animal Rising, which doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not a particularly good name. Yeah, it would mean more for them to call themselves the Animal Liberation Front. But I don't really think it matters what name they call themselves. I think what matters is the messaging. I think the messaging is what's crucial, and it's crucial that the messaging that comes out of that is messaging that encourages ordinary people to go vegan, to say, we've rescued these animals from this farm.
Well, I mean, we've said it over and over. I mean, Animal
We've
Rising
said it over
now,
you see, that's the important thing.
I mean,
and this is where
they've got the action right, but the messaging is all over the place.
Yeah. And I think there's also a worry in terms of, say, a group like Animal Rising, and I think may be the same with DXC possibly, is that they're kind of hierarchical. They've got a hierarchical structure. They've got like a leadership group. There are people employed that kind of run it. And so all the authorities have to do is take those people out.
Well, there's another thing. What worries me about this hierarchical structure of it, which wasn't the case in the A.L.F, is it would worry me if I got the impression that these groups like DXC and all that, they're using the activists as a bit of kind of arrest fodder. I
think, to be fair, that the people that are employed are themselves prepared to be arrested as well. It's not that they're just sitting
it's not like a general sending them off. I know that.
It's not like it's more like the First World War one, where the bloke with the little gun. You see them coming out of the trenches, and there's this bloke with a little gun that's leading them all. That's the captain. But that little gun was to shoot the people on their own side that didn't want to carry on the thing. That was what the little gun was for. If you ever watched that when they come out the trenches.
Yeah, well, I know that when I was inside, all the Scotties were coming back from the Falklands, right? And there was one story where some of the guys shot their own commanding officer because he was such a reckless guy. He was putting them all in danger. So they thought, no way, we're gonna take this guy out.
Did they kill him or just injure him?
Sorry?
Did they kill him or just injure him?
I think they killed him.
Oh, they killed him. Oh. Well, but it's a bit of workers' control there, isn't it? Really?
They went on strike.
Yeah, in quite a serious way. But yeah, and I mean, ideally, the sort of direct action, the best sort of direct action, I think, for animal liberation would be this low-level direct action, because in order to raise awareness, you don't have to have a high level of criminality. You can get publicity for stuff that doesn't carry really big criminal penalties, right? So first of all, it would be low-level criminality. It would be non-violence. It would have a message promoting veganism, encouraging ordinary people to become vegan. I'd say that it would ideally be directed against the food industry. In other words, against the dairy industry, against the meat industry, against the fishing industry, because then it's easier then to.
Well, here's a question then, and we ought to have this the last one because we've gone way over time. Is if Doctor Who would be able to take you back, do you reckon you'd be able to even sell that idea to the activists back then?
Well, the thing is that you see, Well, yes, because you see, I was one of the instigators of the action.
Yeah,
But
no,
when we came together to form the Band of Mercy, but you see, the Band of Mercy was formed really initially in response to one particular problem, and the particular problem it was formed to tackle was cub hunting, where basically they're training the young foxhounds. They just send them into a wood to massacre the fox cubs. So there isn't a chase. So the hunt saboteurs.
yeah. Okay, but skip ahead then to the
So-
A.L.F. Could you have done?
Let's skip ahead. But had I back in those days, had I been thinking, I want to become involved in starting off a direct action organisation. If that been, I wanted to do direct action and I wanted to bring something together. If I went back now, I would do just what I've said in non-violence, low-level criminality, focused on the.
Yeah, but the question is, would you be able to bring anybody with you? That's what I'm asking. Or do you think they go, no, it's all to do with smashing them and, burning them down and destroying,
Well, I think it's very difficult to say. You see, I think that the first thing I would do, you see, I've often thought about this if I had my time again. One of the first things I would do would be at the earliest possible opportunity, I'd get involved with the Vegan Society. And I suggested to the Vegan Society, look, we need to do on the street outreach. We need to take the vegan message to the public. We need to do on the street outreach. We need to outreach at community events. We need to campaign for veganism.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. They even refused the first vegan festival, didn't they?
They did, but you see, if I got like involved with them and kind of maybe worked for them, even on a voluntary basis, and said, look, and explain kind of why we need to do this. We need to get this message to the public. Then I think if veganism had become associated with campaigning, then it would then be would have been easier to promote a form of direct action that promoted veganism. But because the direct action we did at the time kind of really followed on in the same way that organizations had been campaigning prior to that, it didn't include veganism or vegan education. So I think the key would be, before doing the direct action, I think the key would be to kind of turn the Vegan Society into much more of a grassroots campaigning organisation first, and then go into the direct action for veganism after that. And I think the other really essential thing, because I was kind of laying out kind of the ideal form of direct action, and I was saying it'd be non-violent, it'd be low-level criminality, it would be targeted against the food industry. I think another very, very important point is that it would be autonomous, and that it wouldn't be controlled by a centralized group of people. It would be the same as the A.L.F, like the A.L.F, but a different form of direct action with a different form of messaging.
Ironically,
I think that would be the ideal way.
That could be now, if you wanted to kind of do that or suggest it or something. That could be the main block to it, the fact that people are not autonomous anymore and they're looking for leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the only autonomous direct action, I mean, I was really quite proud of my wife, Louise, because she was involved in that sort of autonomous action, except it was against the vivisection industry. It was against the laboratory where they kind of covered it in this eco-friendly chalk paint, and they handcuffed themselves to the gates and they scattered flowers around and things. They're all arrested and due to appear in court early next month for it. That was exactly the type of thing I'm talking about. It wasn't, they weren't under any organization, any hierarchical group. They're just a group of women that came together to do this. Right now, loads of people could do that kind of thing, but I mean, the only thing that kind of I would have been happy about, in a sense, I think, if it had been against the meat industry, dairy industry, or fishing industry, so that it would have been easier to put out a go vegan message accompanying it. Really, that's the only thing. Well, Roger seems to have gone. I don't know whether. I hope his little cat's okay while he's away.
Yeah, cat problems.
I thought you had. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did say that.
we ought to go. I'm sorry about this, but
No, that's okay. But
yeah.
that's kind of what I'd say as you know, as,
we're
as,
way
as,
over time anyway. So
as a final word, not that I'm encouraging anyone to break the law. I'm just saying that's kind of my idea of what would be, you know, what would be the ideal. If I was to think of an ideal form of direct action, now, that's the form it would take.
Yeah.
But of course, in addition to that,
okay, people, thanks very much for sticking with us. I do have to shoot, and that means that when I'm off, Ronnie, I'll probably have to shoot straight away. Okay,
that's all right, mate. Yeah.
So we'll be back next time. This is probably. I thought this was going to be quite a short thing.
I did as well, but we kind of went down memory lane a bit, didn't we?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, but we will be back next week, providing, of course,
we are still alive.